A beachgoer in Southern California made this discovery. It's a type of deep-sea predator, and officials say this one must be a female. Their teeth are transparent like shards of glass, and it's very rare that you actually get to see one.
From unidentifiable masses of meat and deep-sea horrors to confusing mass strandings, these are the creepiest sea creatures to wash up on shore. First, healthy great whites. When we think of animals being washed ashore, we often think of old and sick fish that can't resist the tide, or fish that get caught in a storm. In general, they have something wrong with them. But on October 5th of 2023, a large 14-foot great white was seen struggling and thrashing in Cape Breton waters before being stranded. This was the most recent in a disturbing string of seemingly healthy great whites washing up on Canadian shores. Even after an extensive autopsy and investigation, no reason was found for a large and apparently healthy shark to be stranded like this. Some have raised concerns, as in 2022 there was only one great white that washed up, whereas in 2023 there were more than 5. This sort of uptick in strandings is not normal or natural, and has caused many environmentalists some serious concern. How and why was this shark washed up? It had injuries, but they were all old and healed. It was well fed, it didn't have any trauma, and passed all disease tests. The mystery is still out there. Next is the whale fall. On the 16th of July 2023, something gut-wrenching happened. Beachgoers were shocked, and local officials and rescue workers went into overdrive when 55 pilot whales washed up on the Isle of Lewis. The entire pod had beached itself and had already suffered heavily. It was determined that one mother had a very difficult birth, which led to her being washed ashore and stranded. But pilot whales are deeply social animals and do not abandon one another. It's believed the rest of the pod either intentionally beached themselves or were staying close in shallow water and were accidentally beached. 15 whales were alive when rescue workers and medics arrived, but due to the excessive amount of trauma, only one could be successfully saved and returned to the water, making this one of the single largest mass whale death events in history.
We normally see a single whale, the very occasional group of a small number, but this is certainly my biggest number I've ever seen in a single stranding.
Next is the Globster Monster. Recently, a massive lump of decaying flesh washed up in Papua New Guinea, and no one knows what it is. These gelatinous masses of decaying matter do wash up every now and again and are known as globsters, being essentially impossible to identify or recognize. This particular one happened to look quite a bit like a mermaid, which raised a lot of excitement, despite the fact it is almost certainly some sort of whale, seal, dugong, or other marine mammal. Indeed, researchers were able to narrow the globster's identity down to being a marine mammal at least, but beyond that, no one can really tell. Apparently, no one wanted to go through DNA testing of this putrid mass, and instead, it was simply buried by the locals. Next is the lance on shore. The long-nosed lancetfish is one of the larger deep-sea predatory fish and can dwell down to 6,000 feet in depth. They have a long dorsal sail and gelatinous muscles, yet are successful predators in the deep. Yet, for some reason, one which no one knows, lancetfish keep washing up on the Oregon coast. It's not a ton of them, and it's not very frequent, but it has been happening consistently for decades or even longer, and yet still, no one knows why. There are theories to be sure, but none are exactly sufficient. Some say these lancetfish are old and weak and simply get slowly washed into shore, unable to fight the current any longer. Others think it may be due to storms that wash them ashore, and yet others say it's actually caused by cold shocks, channels of very cold water that a fish may get into, causing immediate shock. Still, nothing has been proven, and the lancetfish mystery continues.
Lancetfish are quite common and sometimes caught more frequently in the waters of Hawaii than even tuna and swordfish.
Next is the deep sea football.
It's called a Pacific football fish, and it's very rare that you actually get to see one, but a beachgoer in Southern California made this discovery.
The Pacific football fish, so named because it looks like a soccer or football, is a species of deep-sea anglerfish and is one of the best ambushers in the wild. They hide in the pitch black of the deep sea and use an adapted bioluminescent spine as a lure, drawing prey into ranges for their mouth to snatch out and grab. These fish dwell at a depth of some 2,000 to 3,000 feet, completely isolated from the light. So how then did the fish wind up 3,000 feet out of its home? How did it wind up on Laguna Beach in California? California. In truth, no one really knows, but there are a lot of theories, from a storm that churned up the deep sea water, or a cold shock that ended this fish, or even a deep sea disease. Who knows the real reason, but it seems that every once in a while, Crystal Cove, California gets a deep sea fleshy beach surprise. Next is the megamouth. The megamouth shark is a very large deep sea shark, and yet is the smallest of the filter feeders. It uses its fine interlocking teeth as a sieve, and its titular big mouth helps it gulp up large amounts of water and prey. Because they're such deep sea creatures, we know very little about them and only have a few studyable specimens. This 18-foot long shark washed up in the Philippines completely stunning scientists. It was pregnant with 7 pups. This was a massive discovery, as it not only tells us the potential average litter size, but also that megamouths give birth to live young, as opposed to some species that lay eggs. This is the first of many steps towards gaining a better understanding of these huge and strange deep sea creatures. Oh, and because, of course, nothing can ever be easy with science, no one knows why this shark was washed ashore. Next is the white whale. The white whale seems to have gotten tired of running from Captain Ahab and decided to spare him the satisfaction and beached itself. Of course, this isn't a vicious and combative sperm whale like in the book, it's instead a humpback, but it is still, obviously, a very big white whale. However, it didn't quite have albinism, as it did have spots of darker coloration on its skin. Researchers believe it had leucism, a genetic condition similar to albinism, but which doesn't quite affect all the pigment cells. It's unknown why this juvenile female humpback washed up on shore, and whether it had anything to do with its white skin or not, as many animals with albinism or leucism are often at greater threat from predators. And finally, the penguin apocalypse. The fairy penguins of Australia and New Zealand are an absolutely adorable species that live in small dens in protected sections of beach. Each penguin only grows to a foot tall maximum, and they spend all day in the water hunting before returning home for nightfall. But these penguins didn't return. In fact, a lot of them didn't. Multiple times, entire communities of penguins have washed up deceased at the same time. It's unknown what's causing this mass dying of fairy penguins, but as someone who has seen these little penguins return from the water and waddle to their nests, it truly hurts my heart to think of so many of these little penguins washing up at once. Those were the creepiest sea creatures that washed up on shore. I hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you next time. Each penguin only grows to a foot tall maximum, and they spend all day in the water hunting. Ah, fly. Sorry.